Well, welcome everyone for joining our webinar today, Final Barriers in EV Fleet and Consumer Adoption, the Freedom to Buy. My name is Catherine Stankin, and I'm the Vice President of Policy at the Electrification Coalition. We are a nonprofit, bipartisan organization looking to get to mass adoption of EVs for the positive impact that transition will have on our national security and global competitiveness. Please put your questions in the chat and we will try to address them. This presentation is being recorded and will be sent around in follow-up material. But to start, electric vehicles, whether light duty vehicles or medium and heavy duty vehicles, bring a range of benefits to fleets and consumers. Given the stable and lower cost of electricity compared to traditional fuels and the savings on maintenance for EVs, which are half as much as what they are for internal combustion vehicles, EVs are very attractive financial options for fleets and consumers. However, in approximately 60% of states, auto dealership franchise laws prohibit vehicle manufacturers from selling their products directly to customers, including fleets. And instead, these franchise laws require that new vehicles be sold and serviced only by franchise dealers. Today's webinar will look at removing the unnecessary market barriers that stand in the way of fleet operators and consumers and enabling the freedom to buy the EV of choice from the manufacturer of choice. So we have a lot of great, fantastic speakers today, and I'm going to now pass it to James DeFilippo, who's the Senior Policy Analyst with Atlas Public Policy. James, looking forward to your remarks.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm James DeFilippo. I'm a Policy Analyst at Atlas Public Policy, and we recently published a report estimating the impacts of direct-to-consumer electric vehicle sales, and which we're looking at the GHG impacts and sales impacts of direct-to-consumer policies. So the question that we sought to answer here was, what are the potential electric vehicle sales and greenhouse gas impacts of dealer franchise law reform? And we dug into the literature here and really found that the impacts of dealer franchise laws are understudied. There is evidence, though, that the dealership model increases costs of vehicles to consumers. So our analysis examines the impacts of removing that cost from EV buyers by effectively reducing the EV costs in the same way a tax incentive or a rebate does. The analysis really focuses on the economic impact of dealer franchise laws and not kind of other things that are identified in the literature, like poor consumer experience and those kind of non-financial impacts. And we estimate the GHG emission impacts of additional EV sales and address uncertainty through scenario analysis. And up on the screen now, you can see the kind of integrated process model diagram. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through that, but feel free to check out our paper if you're interested in more about the methods. What we found is that if dealer franchise law reform put into effect in 2023 could result in between 360,000 to 3.9 million additional EV sales. And the big kind of difference in results here is just due to a lot of uncertainty in the literature about what the actual impact on costs would be and how that might translate into sales. That translates into, in an environmental model, savings of 117 million metric tons of GHG reductions by the year 2030. Our conclusions here and kind of the future research is that we think that the impact of dealer franchise law reform that unlocks lower cost sales channels for EVs really could have a substantial impact on EV adoption and GHG emission reductions. We did find that more research is needed to develop a better understanding of this, particularly the quantified impacts of kind of those non-financial effects that I was describing, of poor experiences at dealers, low information, and how those might be impacting EV adoption. And also, we need better estimates of what the cost reductions that are achievable through direct-to-consumer sales. And with that, I'll pass it back to Catherine.
Great, thanks, James. But just to follow up really quickly there, and I know we're going to save questions for you more at the end too, but it sounds like you ran through that very quickly, but just the overall takeaway there is that there was a positive correlation there between the ability to sell direct from a manufacturer and EV adoption, correct?
Correct. From the modeling that we did, the savings that consumers could achieve from direct sales would lead directly to additional adoption.
Okay, great. And I know that your work is available on the Atlas Public Policy website there, and we'll get to more questions for you with the analysis in the Q&A. But I'm going to move now to introduce Lori Weigel, who's the principal with Newbridge Strategy, and she's going to talk to us about some polling that she did for North Carolina in terms of the freedom to buy. Lori?
Great, thank you. I'm the principal with Newbridge Strategy. We conduct opinion research on a host of issues related to public policy and a range of other issues. We're going to walk through some survey data from North Carolina, and we're really using North Carolina as sort of a test case of what we've seen in other states in terms of how we explain and talk about these issues. So this research was conducted back in April, and again, this is sort of the boring part, but again, it's a representative sample throughout the state, obviously a really varied state with rural and very urban areas. And we conducted the research in April. We preceded that research with some qualitative research, sort of online focus groups that really helped us to understand what people said, what people knew, and how they were approaching this issue. So there's some core views that are really important to understand. First of all, we know that that in the survey, we asked them to just tell us about their sentiment towards automobile manufacturers versus auto dealers. And they really start with a very positive perception of automobile manufacturers versus dealers. Dealers are a little more mixed because they told us that they'd had sort of varied experiences, and it really mattered the person that they encountered in terms of dealing with someone at a dealership. We also asked them just their overall perception of electric vehicles, since that's an important aspect of this issue, clearly. And what we saw was that, they're more positive than not. There's still some misperceptions, particularly related to cost, that we heard about in the qualitative research. And that's why you have a little bit more unfavorable there. But generally, people are fairly positive in terms of their initial perceptions. In fact, so much so that 3 in 10 voters say that in North Carolina say that will purchase electric as their next vehicle. But even among those who are a little more resistant and saying, no, I'm not sure if my next vehicle is going to be an electric one, they were interested in a test drive at the very least. You can see some of the quotes that we heard. One woman telling us that she really wanted to know a little bit more about what all the fuss was about. Now, so that really undergirds some of those perceptions, but we also wanted to see, like, what do they know about how we buy vehicles in the state of North Carolina? So we asked them, from what they know, in North Carolina, can a consumer only purchase a new vehicle from an automobile dealer, purchase it directly from the manufacturer? We had 12% choose that. Or basically, do they not know? Well, it's pretty rare that people will just flat out admit that they don't know something, but we had a majority here that said, nope, I have no idea how the laws work right now. So we had anticipated that based on what we heard in the qualitative research. So we gave them a quick explanation. And I will note that this explanation is really from the consumer perspective, because that is what that's how they come to the table on this, and telling them that consumers cannot buy a new vehicle straight from a manufacturer, whether that's for an individual or whether that's a school district or city looking for a bus, and explained a little bit about that process. And then asked them, would they support or oppose allowing North Carolina drivers to purchase a vehicle straight from the manufacturer, and of course to receive that routine service and repairs. Well, I can tell you it's very few issues, especially public policy related issues on which we conduct surveys, where we have more than 4 in 5 saying, oh yeah, I support that. In fact, almost half strongly supported that. And I will note it's also very rare that we see support across, especially across the partisan spectrum. If you look over on the right-hand side, 4 in 5 Republicans, virtually the same number of Democrats, and even overwhelmingly more among independent or unaffiliated respondents telling us that they support this direct sales model. Why is that? Well, they told us first and foremost, they felt like just cutting out that middleman of dealerships was going to allow for more choices, was going to allow potentially for cost savings. Just was something would be a better model And, that they really often even compared it to other ways of buying. And that they really wanted that freedom to be able to access this important purchase, just like they do so many other types of products. Now, we asked it conceptually, but then we got more specific about the electric vehicle aspect and told them today 80% of EVs in the US are purchased directly from the manufacturer. Told them that Tesla had started this way of selling cars in North Carolina and had a special exception to the dealership law. But that there's dozens of others that are prohibited by state law from opening a showroom in the state and selling directly to consumers. Support increases even further once they have this electric vehicle aspect understood. It's up to 85%, and a majority saying that they strongly support that. And even if they don't like electric vehicles, had an initially unfavorable perception of them, even if they say, my next vehicle is not going to be an electric vehicle, they were overwhelmingly supportive of allowing direct sales. And that is for a number of reasons. In large part, they saw that manufacturer direct purchasing was really going to be, they thought it would be easier. It was going to be easier to purchase a new vehicle. They thought they'd have more choices, as they initially told us. We saw 69% thought it would have a positive impact on choices. In fact, a majority said it'd be a great way to increase their opportunities to test drive an EV. And in fact, we had a majority telling us they thought it would be a positive for North Carolina's economy overall. So really a big reception to this in concept, and we really see that this is sort of a unique experience where voters across the partisan spectrum are really saying this is something that's important to them and that they're very supportive of.
Thanks, Lori. Wow, those are pretty strong results there for North Carolina. I'm curious if we were to do this in other states, if it would poll also as high. Any immediate thoughts there?
Yeah, I do think this is sort of a unique issue in that we're really seeing across the partisan spectrum. It's not just folks in cities, or suburbs. It's really every type of community, every region of the state. And North Carolina's been sort of a bellwether on other policy issues. So I think it would carry over in many respects.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for your remarks and for the presentation. And we have a couple more speakers here before we get to the Q&A. So I'm going to now pass to my colleague, Will Dreyer, who is our Senior Policy Manager with the Electrification Coalition. And Will is going to really talk to us about fleets and the freedom to buy. Will, take it away.
Thanks for the introduction, Catherine. I'm Will Dreyer, working with Electrification Coalition. We are a bipartisan nonprofit organization that's focused on facilitating the rapid adoption of electric vehicles. We see transportation electrification is of vital importance if we're going to address the national and economic security risks that are associated with our dependence on oil. I'm really excited today to share with you a report we've been working on for some time on giving fleets the freedom to buy EVs directly from the manufacturer. So we set out to do this report to call it the challenges of the current regulatory landscape that are created for fleet EV adoption, and to discuss how the changes can create a number of benefits for all parties involved in the sales and service of EVs. We need to do a fair bit of work to enable fleets to more easily lead the charge in EV adoption, and direct-to-consumer sales is one of many policies that'll help us achieve our goals. So beyond moving away from oil, what are some of the reasons that fleets should be looking to electrify? Well, it improves the air quality and public health of the communities they serve and operate within. It provides fleet operators a significant savings in fuel and maintenance, as electricity is produced domestically, is more stable and more predictable than petroleum-based fuels, and EVs require significantly less maintenance. Finally, with zero tailpipe emissions, electrification can help fleet managers meet any of their emissions or sustainability goals. So what's the deal with direct consumer sales? Right now, you can see here's a map. There is quite a bit of a patchwork of existing policies that creates a number of challenges for fleets wanting to buy and service their EVs, and for the manufacturers that are trying to sell them. As Catherine mentioned earlier, about 60% of states, there are franchise laws that prohibit giving customers the freedom to buy EVs from manufacturers. And many of those states lack clarity on if the manufacturer can provide warranty services as well. Rather, here, the laws require EVs be sold and serviced directly through franchise dealers. Very briefly, recap on the history of franchise dealership laws. In the early to mid 20th century, franchise dealership laws were created to protect dealerships, then of the mom and pop store variety from the big three automakers, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, who at that point had significant bargaining power over the dealers, and often were subject to unfair contractual terms and competition. At that point, dealers ultimately were able to persuade most state legislatures to pass protective laws, but automakers benefited from these laws as well by being able to relieve themselves from undertaking massive capital investments in physical store locations across the nation and focusing strictly more on production and growth. However, now dealerships we see, our dealership groups represent multi-billion-dollar operations, while the market is now ripe with domestic and international manufacturers competing in the US, along with a host of new EV manufacturers. So these franchise laws are slowing down the deployment of electric vehicles from legacy EV manufacturers and are preventing new EV manufacturers from having a pathway to market. Tesla has been able to secure some additional markets shown here on the map where freedom to buy is limited, but most of these exemptions were closed behind them. This prevents EV manufacturers from undertaking similar sales and service channels and leaves a lot of the, not all of the new market entrants to navigate the patchwork of state laws and finding workarounds for their prospective and existing customers. Within the report, we've identified a number of benefits that would come along with giving fleets the freedom to buy EVs from the manufacturer. First, of course, new jobs with investments in brick and mortar sales and service centers. New jobs would also be needed to fill these facilities. States allowing for freedom to buy would also be signaling for investment in the development of EV supply chains, which would include manufacturing, sales, and servicing. Freedom to buy will also create new market competition, which would allow the dealers and the EV manufacturers to compete to provide the best prices and the best customer service. The direct sales channel will also create predictability and transparency in pricing, which will allow fleet managers to better understand their ability to procure EVs. There's a few other issues that giving freedom to buy will help to overcome. First, fleets are eager to buy EVs and from EV manufacturers, new ones and old alike, but may find themselves limited in the ability to do so. Some fleets, particularly those within governments, have a bid list of approved dealers they must purchase from, which may not include EV manufacturers, particularly those without a dealership network. Additionally, these policies may inhibit financing assistance from EV manufacturers that will have the expertise to help managers navigate the transition to electric. Really, overall, these hurdles, along with the patchwork of state policies surrounding fleet warranty repair, only adds to the complexity of an already significant undertaking for fleet electrification. So finally, the main takeaways, the policy recommendations from a report. I'm sure you saw this, number one coming, but that direct EV sales should be allowed for all manufacturers and vehicle types. This will allow all manufacturers to bring their EVs to market quickly, support automotive innovation, and encourage and support dealerships to continue to play a role as a competing EV sales channel. Second, if direct sales of EVs for all manufacturers is not feasible, EV only manufacturers such as Arrival, Rivian, and Tesla should be granted the ability to sell and service direct in order to provide them with a feasible pathway to bring their EVs to market. Third, states should review the current legislation and identify how their licensing processes can be communicated clearly and efficiently, especially given the new technologies coming to market. Fourth, states should allow manufacturers, fleets, third parties, and franchise dealers the ability to provide EV warranty services. And five, finally, state policies should also encourage innovative business models that can provide turnkey solutions to the procurement of EVs, charging equipment, and maintenance. That wraps up our report, and I'll toss it back to Catherine.
Great, thanks, Will. Great presentation. And I know so often when we think about the freedom to buy issue, we think about the light duty cars, right? But now there's a whole other sector of the transportation, medium heavy duty fleets that we haven't even thought about how these laws are affecting that whole sector and what it means for EV adoption. So excited to read more through the report and get it out to our audience participants too.
Me too, thank you.
Great, so now we're going to bring up Suzanne Merkelson, who is Public Policy Manager with Arrival. So Suzanne, I'm really curious to hear from you. Tell us about Arrival, what you guys do, where you manufacture, and how the freedom to buy is needed for your vehicles.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine, and thanks so much for having me today on the webinar. I'm with Arrival. I lead our state and local policy work here in the U.S. So I'll first tell you a little bit about Arrival, and then we'll tell you how franchise laws actually impact our ability to do business in the states, especially the states that limit freedom to buy. Hoping to provide you with a real world example of just, how these laws impact just one new entrant to the EV industry. So Arrival manufactures commercial electric vehicles. We work almost exclusively with fleet customers. So we're really excited about the paper Will just presented on. We expect to start production in our Charlotte micro factory next year. Our largest announced customer is UPS, which has placed a 10,000 van order with us. So I just mentioned our micro factories. That's one of our key innovations. We're really focused on local small scale production, and we're able to use advances in composite materials and robofacturing to make products that are really unique to our customers and to local communities' needs. I want to emphasize, we think the commercial sector is a hugely important and underserved market. The sector especially has a huge impact on air quality in all communities, including and especially disadvantaged communities and communities of color, where there's a lot of transport through those communities. So while light duty vehicles account for the largest portion of transportation sector emissions, medium and heavy duty vehicles, such as the market that we serve, have a disproportionate impact on emissions. They make up just 5% of vehicles on the road, but about 24% of all US transportation emissions. So it's really vital that we electrify these vehicles to improve air quality and address the climate crisis. We're also, as I think Will mentioned, we're seeing rising demand from fleet operators to decarbonize and a specific interest in different options for vehicles that might best serve different needs that these customers have. So as Catherine said, the freedom to buy issue is understood mostly as one that's specific to individual consumers. But these laws actually apply to the sales and servicing of fleet vehicles as well, as Will just outlined. I think a lot of people don't quite realize that, even people well-versed in this issue. Given that we're primarily working with fleets, our approach to marketing, sales, and servicing is pretty unique and tailored to our customers' needs. While we hope to deploy many vehicles in our home state of North Carolina, some of our customers operate fleets nationwide, so local marketing and sales efforts aren't necessarily helpful. We're really talking to our customers based on, their nationwide or even global needs, not necessarily their needs in one location. So I do want to also clarify that, we believe our sales model can coexist with the existing dealership model in the States. We're not, we think that there are different needs for these vehicles, especially electric vehicles. And we're, hoping that we can, be able to enter the market that we want to enter while also allowing customers to choose how they purchase their vehicles, including at a dealership. So we work directly with companies. We're a B2B business. We often involve our customers in the design process. So UPS has provided us with direct feedback of our van as we've designed it. It simply doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense for us to go through a dealership to sell and service our vehicles. I think, for states, prohibitions on direct sales might give those states a reputation of an unfriendly business environment for new technology companies like us. Right now we're actually in the process of understanding how we can sell our vehicles through other states, which means we'd likely have to move our vehicles out of the state where we're manufacturing them to actually sell them, even if it's to in-state customers. So you can really imagine the cost and complexity added with this method of selling vehicles. One really important piece that Will discussed in his policy recommendations that I want to emphasize here, there's a lot of ambiguity in many state laws about what's actually allowed in terms of sales. Several states require a hearing to obtain a sales license, and the approving organizations may even include auto dealers who are incentivized to reject the application. In some states, there may not be regulatory staff who are equipped to navigate the process, given just how new, the technology is and our sales method. Excuse me. While in many states, the laws are simply unfair to new market entrants, such as EV-only manufacturers, in other states, it's just not obvious how the law, which might have been written decades ago with a completely different product in mind, might be interpreted. All in all, it's really difficult to predict how easy or how hard it might be to obtain a sales license, even if the law appears to be very clear. So, though this obviously impacts our business, it's also bad for both small and large businesses who are looking to transition to EVs. Given that we're not able to sell directly to customers in many states, adding a middleman who will mark up the price of the vehicles doesn't benefit the customer or really create a business environment that supports this massive transition that we need to undertake. I also want to highlight something else that Will said, which is, the impact that franchise laws have on servicing vehicles specifically. We like to provide maximum flexibility to our customers, whether they prefer to self-service, as many larger fleets do, or via a network of trained professionals and third parties. So overall, ultimately, we should be doing everything that we can to transition fleets to electric, and these laws really hinder our ability to do that. It won't cost the states anything to re-examine those laws and to make it more fair for companies like ours to do business in these states. So looking forward to any questions, and thanks again for having me.
Awesome, thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, I mean, we have so many, there's new climate laws and goals to achieve there, sustainability goals, funding to help address this. And so we need all options on the table, it seems, to be able to achieve these goals. So fully agree with you and your remarks there. Well, we're now going to bring up all our speakers, and we're also going to be joined by Dan Crane and by Logan Colas. Dan Crane is a professor of law with the University of Michigan Law School, and Logan Colas is an economic policy analyst with the Buckeye Institute. So I have a lot of questions, and I'm looking forward to this dialogue right now. But first of all, Dan, you have a wealth of historic knowledge around this particular topic of direct sales and the freedom to buy. So I'd like to turn to you and tell us a little bit about that there, the history, and then also I know in the past that there's been overwhelming support from academics on this issue too. So can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. Well, thanks, Catherine, and good to be with you all. So I think Will already introduced the history a little bit, but it's really important to understand where these laws came from, because they just have no application to the circumstances we're talking about today. So as Will said, in the middle of the 20th century, you had mom and pop dealers and the big three as the franchising manufacturers. And the argument was there's grossly unfair, unequal bargaining power. Manufacturers would allow their franchisees, these mom and pop family-owned businesses, to invest in promoting the GM or Chrysler or Ford brand, and then open up their own retail service center and store across the street and unfairly siphon off all that investment that the little mom and pop dealer had made. That was the argument, at least, and that's what led to these prohibitions on the manufacturer opening up its own stores. Now, that story has just nothing to do with what we're talking about today. First of all, as Will said, the dealers are no longer mom and pop businesses. The top 10 dealer groups in America collectively have annual revenue of over 100 billion, that's with a B, dollars. These are bigger in many cases than the car companies themselves. Also, we have not 3 manufacturing groups, we have closer to 20 or more car groups. So it's a much more competitive market. But never mind that, like, even if you thought there's a reason to protect some dealers in some circumstances, that surely would not apply to companies like Tesla, Rivian, Lucid that don't want to use dealers at all. And as several courts have recognized, the rationale of a rule that says let's protect a dealer from its own franchising manufacturer has nothing to do with a dealer that says, I don't like competition from Tesla in a brand I'm not selling, right? So there's no rationale from even dealer protection to say, let's stop companies from, or a rival, right, from selling direct. Why would you do that? You're not protecting the dealer from its own franchising manufacturer. So again, the context is different, the justifications are different. The dealers understand this. The dealers understand that they can no longer rest on a protect us rationale, and so they've tried to say this is consumer protection. Now, as Catherine mentioned, I don't know a single academic who, from left to right, that's endorsed that point of view. But here's the thing. First of all, like, why would you trust the dealers on this? Because like, are the dealers a good surrogate for the consumer interest? Why wouldn't you trust, let's say, the Consumer Federation of America, or the United States Federal Trade Commission, or Consumer Action, or Consumers for Auto Reliability and Safety, all of which, by the way, which are consumer protection groups, have argued that these bans on direct sales are bad for consumers, that consumers should be allowed to have a choice. So it's just a little bit not credible that the dealers are presenting themselves as the champions of the consumer interest. Parenthetically, what's the most complained of business in America to the Better Business Bureau? It's not cable companies, it's not debt collectors, it's car dealers, 3 million complaints a year. I'm not saying that they're all bad, just saying that, like, you should prima facie not accept their effort to take laws which had nothing to do with consumer protection in their origin. They're all about protecting dealers, and now say suddenly these are consumer protection laws. I'm happy to talk about the arguments that they present. Again, I don't think there's a single one of those arguments that's got any credibility among academics, among economists, among people who are kind of neutral in terms of the stakes. As Catherine said, there has been very widespread support among academics for liberalizing state laws. And again, many states have, and Catherine said it may be 60% of the states still prohibited. I want to be careful. I mean, I think the states are very varied. There's lots of variation state by state. Like my home state of Michigan, what's the law? Well, there's a settlement kind of governing, you know, what Tesla can do right now, and by implication, probably Rivian and Lucid, right? What GM and Ford can do is different. So I think it's actually, there's a lot of variation and nuance state to state, but like roughly it's around, you know, half and half open versus closed states in some way. And the question is, should we move towards opening it up so that everyone can compete and consumers can choose? And that's why I think there's overwhelming support among academics for allowing consumers and allowing manufacturers to make that choice for themselves. And there's a particular view that these prohibitions are, and I think, you know, James presented the evidence here, but they're slowing the penetration of EVs into the market. And that's because the dealer model, the franchise dealer model, simply is not optimized for EV sales. Again, lots to say about that. Happy to answer questions about it. But if you think about the dealer economic model, what's it based on? It's based on high pressure sales tactics to sell a known technology that is in inventory on the lot, and to make most of the profits not from the sale of the car, but from servicing it through warranty service, that it's a self-protected under state law, 30% margins of warranty service. That's the economic model. And you think about EV sales, which is a new technology, high pressure sales tactics, again, those customers that Lori talked about that are on the fence, they're going to walk away, right? Tesla finds that it takes 5 or 6 interactions with a Tesla representative and the technology for someone to be convinced that they want that technology, right? High pressure sales tactics, it's a big turnoff. It's not going to work, right? It's not about what's on the lot. This is all built to order, right? You're not talking sitting on inventory and trying to push it out the door. You're trying to get customers committed to the technology and the company, right? And the economic model, which is we'll sell it to them and then make it back on service, doesn't work when you're talking about over-the-air updates, no oil changes, right? A very different service component. So all the evidence suggests that, I guess, structurally, the current dealer model, it just isn't optimized for sales through dealerships. And so when the Sierra Club and Consumer Reports send out secret shoppers, even to dealerships that have existing EVs in the fleet, what do they find? They're not charged. They're being discouraged from being bought. Sometimes they actually refuse to be shown by the dealers. Like, again, it's all understandable because it's not the way they're set up to perform, right? One thing I'll close on this. I think it's important to understand that no one is arguing. I'm not saying that it's impossible to have sales of EVs through dealerships. That's happening right now. It's a thing in the world. The question is, are laws that prohibit direct sales going to significantly slow EV market penetration, right? And that's where I think the answer is overwhelmingly yes. So you don't have to take the view that EV sales cannot happen through dealerships to say that, but requiring that as a matter of law is bad public policy. The dealers often argue, hey, look, actually direct sales just don't work. I mean, I've been on panels at the Federal Trade Commission where you get these, lobbyists for the dealer saying, here are 15 reasons that direct sales just don't work as a business matter. Fine, like you believe, first of all, they don't believe that, because if they believe that, they'd be sitting back laughing, waiting for Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, and Arrival, and everyone else to fail in direct sales, and then they come crawling back to the dealers begging for their help. Obviously, they don't think that because they're putting so much elbow grease, the dealers are, into fighting this politically as a matter of law, to keeping a prohibition. So what their behavior evidence is that they fully understand that direct sales do work and that they're a serious competitive threat to the dealer model, which is precisely why they're willing to spend every last dime of political capital to prevent it from happening as a matter of law. So the dealers don't fear that EV direct sales will fail. They fear that it will succeed. And obviously Tesla's example of it's succeeding dramatically well. But what I want to stress is, I actually don't know. I'm a pointy-headed academic. I can't tell you what works and what doesn't work as a distribution strategy. I have zero skin in the game. This is not my money, right? But I can tell you, as a matter of public policy, for the law to pick a single distribution model from the 1950s and say, that's it, that's all you can do, that's terrible public policy. What we want to see is experimentation in the market, where people with skin in the game, companies and consumers, get to decide. And different companies will use different strategies. Some, GM has said, we think that our dealer network is a fantastic advantage in selling EVs. Fantastic, go for it. You employ that advantage you have. Tesla, Rivian, everyone else has said, no, it's a disadvantage. Fantastic, try it. Or maybe you're like Apple, you try a hybrid model. We'll have our own stores, we'll sell online, we'll also sell through wireless carriers and big box stores and Target. Fine, like what we'll see, what will happen is there'll be an experiment called competition in the market where people get to make choices, and then we'll know which strategies work and which strategies don't work, right? So this is not about anyone saying, here is the way that EVs have to be sold. Like, companies with skin in the game have their views and let them try it out. But what clearly is not good as a matter of public policy is for the law to pick a single dated distribution method and say, that's it for everyone. You're locked into that. Let's see what works. And probably it's not one thing that works, it's a variety of things that work, right? We'll see a plurality of models in the market. And like for most consumer goods, whether it's computers or cell phones or almost anything else, there are different distribution models in competition. And it's that competition that drives innovation, consumer benefits, and choice. Thanks.
Wow, we could just probably end here with all of those amazing points that you just brought up, Dan. That was fantastic. I mean, wow. I mean, I am in 100% agreement with you. We should allow for innovation, and then we're going to talk about that in another second. But first, I want to get to Logan and you. Your group supports the freedom to buy from the perspective of free markets and why they're good for the economy. So can you elaborate more there, Logan?
Well, yeah, I could definitely elaborate more on that, but I do want to point out that I do think it's interesting that the additional panelists that you had on were myself, the Buckeye Institute is in Ohio, for those of you who don't know, and then Professor Crane, who's in Michigan. These are typically two of your states that tend to be associated with the Rust Belt, but the Rust Belt's trying to make a transition, and you hear it in Ohio with the Intel investment about how we're trying to go from Rust Belt to Silicon Heartland, right? You hear that all the time. And it's interesting because really what you're doing by prohibiting direct sale is you're really hedging your bets and saying that you have to go all in on a model that may not be the wave of the future. As Professor Crane, this may work for GM, who's talking about becoming more and more electrified. But that may not be the case for somebody like Lucid, Rivian, all these other groups. So you're really throwing your hat into the ring of only one side of the competition as you make it difficult for other people to direct sale. So if really you're throwing your bets on already entrenched players, and that's not necessarily a smart thing for what we should be doing. Ohio, if it wants to become the Silicon Heartland, if that's the goal of what Ohio wants to be, it means that allowing people like Lucid, Rivian to be able to come to Ohio and actually promote competition in the state and allow direct sale. And the other thing that I think is it's kind of interesting when you take a deeper dive into some of this is Ohio's kind of put a lot of money behind this as well. We've had some legislation talking about subsidies for electric vehicle manufacturers. You've also seen a new investment from the state, an economic development program when it comes to Honda and batteries for electric vehicles. So really, I think it's kind of interesting that we've kind of gone all in on one model instead of trying to promote competition, as Professor Crane was talking about. So I just think it's something that we have to be really, really interested, take a longer study on. But I also don't want to shoot the middleman here. Like I think when in a free market, you've also seen that there is some value to having retailers. So you've seen a lot of people go into like your Home Depots of the world and people that are able to distribute this. But there's a reason that 80% of electric vehicles are sold through direct sale. While that might have value in the future when you have a larger uptick of electric vehicles in the market, it doesn't seem that's the way to jumpstart yourself into the future. So as the direct sale states are becoming more and more manufacturing powerhouses when it comes to electric vehicles, Ohio is kind of lagging that trend. And that's something that Ohio needs to be really careful about.
Thanks, Logan. Well, I want to continue on the theme of the middleman though there. And so Professor Crane mentioned about, with Apple, there's a lot of different ways to go and buy that product. With furniture, there's a lot of different ways to go and buy that product. And Lori, I'm curious if you have done any polling with other, or if there's other areas of our economy too, where the direct sales are enabled, and do you have any thoughts or feedback there?
Well, I do think the Apple comparison was one that consumers themselves often brought up as sort of, well, wait, I can go to Verizon, I can go to Best Buy, but also there's an Apple store. And if I really need help, especially, that's where they tend to go. And so with a product that is so new and different and not well understood, they really want to go directly to that expert before they even, have a quote unquote problem. It's to understand it better. And lots of people talked about that, especially in our qualitative research. Other products are not quite, people do think of purchasing a vehicle as a very significant purchase. And, so they want it well thought out. They want it carefully considered. They want to look at their options. So it's a little bit unique in that respect. I will say that some people liken it to, how we deal with alcohol sales, but that's also a very different dynamic, because it tends to be that safety concerns trump, the free market or the competition or the innovation. They really want to look at, safety trumps convenience, it trumps all other aspects. And it's also not this new, typically unique product that they need to understand. So I think it really is sort of a different dynamic here, but, akin to a major purchase, but like other products, especially technology products, in terms of being able to really access and understand it.
Does anybody else want to comment on other aspects of the economy there?
Yeah, I just add to Lori's point about alcohol sales. The 21st Amendment gives the states the rights to regulate alcohol sales. And the reason we do that is to restrict them, to diminish how much alcohol is sold. So that's a good example of, and it's true, you can't, manufacturers typically cannot sell alcohol directly. That's precisely because we want these wholesalers and dealers in the middle to control how much of this is sold. So if your goal is to control and limit EV adoption, then I think mandating multiple layers in the distribution chain, that's fantastic, right? If your goal instead is to create choice and to get people into EVs more quickly, I think alcohol exactly proves the point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the consumer protection piece, because we do hear that a lot. That's an argument that comes up. And Dan, you mentioned that in some of your remarks there. And Suzanne, Will showed us that patchwork of states and trying to understand the service. And you could buy in one state maybe, but then there's nuances to all this, as Professor Kane was saying, nuances there with what's allowed, what's not. But so you might even potentially be able to buy in a state, but then you can't get your vehicle serviced there. That's a whole other aspect of what we've talked about. But can you maybe elaborate more on some of the service aspect, the consumer protection aspect there with your vehicles?
Yeah, so it's incredibly complicated. Like, we've tried to put together clear maps about what we can do in each state in terms of servicing. We have a service platform that we are going to be providing our customers, but a lot of them want to service themselves. In a lot of states they can do that, in some states they can't. It's all just very opaque and unclear. So I think when we're talking about consumer protection, it's important to remember what we're protecting the consumer from. There are quite a few existing laws already that, thoroughly protect consumers from manufacturers and from, safety issues and things like that. So, we're just really looking to provide maximum flexibility for our customers. We think that's really important when you're talking about, one vehicle, but also when you're talking about a fleet of them. And a fleet vehicle being off the road for a matter of hours can cost a company, so that's something that we look to do, in our design, that, our vehicles are able to be repaired quickly if needed. We have these composite panels that can easily be replaced, but the law doesn't necessarily, make any of that easier for us and for our customers.
So let's take a question from the audience here. And so how about this one? Many state senators and representatives own dealerships. And so how do you overcome this conflict of interest when pushing for the modifications to the franchise laws for EVs? And maybe Logan or Dan, I see you, you both maybe willing to jump in and tackle this one.
I mean, that's a question ages old of time, right? So there's always been this question about special interests and how do you deal with it. You see it at the federal level, the state level, the local level. You see it with occupational licensing laws. You see it in direct sale issues in Louisiana, speaking of which, Catherine, we were talking about the repair issue. Louisiana actually tried to make it even more difficult for people to repair their electric vehicles in Louisiana. So I think there's an argument to be made that the Louisiana government was going to war with Tesla over the actual repair issue. But how to overcome this is, well, it's difficult because you are fighting an uphill battle on this. But the way it looks in Ohio is, I just start by telling people the truth. It's contrary to a lot of the goals of what Ohio is trying to do. Ohio wants to become the Silicon Heartland, and this makes it more difficult to do that. So a lot of it's just framing your arguments in a way that is actually compelling to what the state is actually trying to do as an overarching theme. And that requires actually knowing what the state is trying to do. In Ohio's case, it's trying to be on that cutting edge wave. We were lagging the rest of the country on so many things for so long. This is an opportunity for Ohio to try and lead. And I get questions from reporters on this, all the time. Like, can Ohio become this next step in the automobile manufacturers revolution? And my response to that is, well, we have a lot of things that make us attractive, and we also have some things that make it difficult for us to get there. So this is one step among many. It's not a silver bullet. It's not the only thing that would do that. But Ohio has a lot of attractive features. We have a rich history of manufacturing in Ohio. So it seems a bit counterintuitive to turn your back on the people that want to come here and manufacture in your state.
Yeah. And then Dan, I want to also want to throw into here before you jump in with Colorado. Tell us about the solution that was proposed there a couple of years ago.
So maybe someone else can talk about Colorado more specifically, but I was just to say to Logan's point about, and to your question earlier about the power of the dealers. I mean, that's exactly right, which is if you look at this from a public policy perspective, you've got all the environmental groups, you've got the free market groups, you've got the consumer groups, you've got all these EV startups, which are American companies that are investing in creating fantastic new products. And as Lori's polling data suggests, when people actually understand what's going on, overwhelming political support across the political spectrum for allowing consumers to choose. So, I mean, the only account I think for why these laws persist is what Logan said, which is it's actually hard when you have entrenched interests that will fight for, to protect their way of life that they've had for many decades. It's hard to overcome that. It's not just that we have many politicians who themselves own car dealerships. The standard of quip is there's a dealer in every district. And so the dealers are spread across the country. They are very active in state, local, and federal elections. They often are, pillars of the community. They invest in a lot of their communities. They employ lots of people. The politics here make it difficult. But I think when you explain to the average person, they understand what's going on. It's like, why would you give a law protecting one particular group of people from economic competition? That's actually, in my view, unconstitutional. And we're going to get probably before too long some additional constitutional challenges to that. I'm pretty sure we are. And take the example of Louisiana that Logan mentioned, and Tesla. So here's the thing: no one can stop people in any state from buying electric vehicles directly from the manufacturer. People in every state, whether it's open or closed, are doing that. They buy it over the internet, they go to their state, they bring it home. There's all kinds of ways. So in Louisiana, although Louisiana is a totally closed state, there are several thousand people who own Teslas that they found a way to buy and bring back to Louisiana. How do they get that car serviced? Well, now the car dealers have figured out you really want to stick a needle into Tesla. You shut down their service center in New Orleans, right? And now consumers have to drive, like in my home state of Michigan, they've had to do for a long time. They have to drive down to Ohio to get service. So if there's any argument, this is about protecting consumers, why would you shut down a warranty service center so that cars can be kept safe and on the road? Like it just is, it's ludicrous that this has anything to do with protecting consumers from manufacturers. It's all about protecting the dealers from competition. Once that is explained to people and they understand it, again, the polling will go above 90%, because unless you're directly aligned with the dealers, it's a very clear issue.
And Catherine, if you don't mind me adding just one more point to layer on top of that, that's the consumer angle. And I agree with that. And I made that point myself, but I'm far from convinced that this is also something that would be good for the dealers themselves in the long run. There's a long history of protectionism protecting people to death. And that's an unfortunate truth about this. And I'm not convinced that in the future, when you have wider EV adoption, as more and more people decide and vote with their feet and their dollars that they want electric vehicles, that a dealership model would be something that's out of the realm of possibilities 20 years from now. So really, there's also the case that I do think that there is a value in the middleman, but it's naturally arising from a free market. So that's something that we should be looking at as well.
Mm. Well, maybe that brings us then to the Colorado example. And so maybe Suzanne, do you want to say a quick few marks about that?
Yeah, so, I think, definitely want to emphasize that when it comes to this issue, it's not a policy issue. As Professor Crane said, it's pretty clear the policy merits of allowing for, freedom to buy and freedom to sell. It's really a political issue. I think that's what this question really gets to. So the compromise in Colorado that came to, and this was a great success by some of the other EV-only manufacturers and the EC, so definitely want to give my kudos to them, is that it allows for EV-only manufacturers who do not have a pre-existing relationship with a dealer to be able to sell directly. So it really allows, those new market entrants to come into the state, provide that needed dose of competition, while also, allowing the dealers to sort of preserve their protection, which, as Logan mentioned, it's maybe not good for them. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. But that's their choice, right? That they want to, kind of preserve that model. But it does allow for, consumers to be able to buy EVs from any company they want to. So I think it's a really good model to consider in other states.
Well, at least that's one solution that's out there, and something that's
Mhm.
happened very recently too, in terms of being able to, for the consumers and the fleet operators, because that's what it's really all about here, is them having access to the vehicles and the freedom to buy. Well, I want to talk about innovation and competition a little bit too, and a couple of you have picked up on that theme about innovation, but in particular, I think, Will, just maybe coming to you, just about how transportation is evolving in general. I mean, in transportation products, we're seeing shared, connected, things like that. So how do you think that just the freedom to buy, like that method just plays into how transportation is changing?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, right? Like, this is a monumental shift in the status quo for transportation. We're seeing electric vehicles across all duty sectors. Yeah, like you mentioned, connected autonomous vehicles. I think the freedom to buy really allows for companies like Arrival has mentioned, or maybe, exploring subscription services that capture, more of the cost in kind of one payment, or turnkey solutions that help fleet operators, look at a solution of, I've got my vehicle and my charging infrastructure and my power, all bundled into one thing. That's not really as possible right now without direct sales kinds of policies being enabled for folks to get engaged in. And really, as we see that shift, innovation will be critical to bridging the gap from the old days of internal combustion engine vehicles to electrification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems, I mean, fuels are changing, where you're fueling is changing, all kinds of things. And so how you purchase your car, that's also should be on the table as something that policymakers are looking at. Does anyone else want to comment on just competition or innovation further? Or if not, we'll jump to I know we're close to the end here, so I think we're going to move to just our final closing round of thoughts then. Let me take a quick look at the chat. There are so many questions in the chat, so we will do our best to respond to everybody and follow up, and slides will be available, and we'll definitely connect you all with our speakers today. But I think let's just go around really quickly and just, your final, what's the big takeaway here for folks? So James, I'm going to turn to you.
Thanks, Catherine. So a lot of what has been discussed today has really been around kind of the non-financial impacts of direct sales prohibitions. And so to kind of give some context on our study, we looked specifically or exclusively at kind of what the financial impacts are to consumers, how much additional cost does a direct sales prohibition impose on a consumer, and modeled that. So when we, thinking of our study in context here, we're kind of modeling the very basic, easy to monetize kind of effects, and didn't capture any of the kind of innovation side, supply chain, consumer choice, those things which also should have an impact on uptake, but are just very difficult to model.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Will, let's go to you. What's your final takeaway?
I think a number of people have mentioned this here, but I think the big thing is these are, it's a super complex web of policies across the whole United States, right? Like Michigan have settlements. You've got places where Tesla has a 4-store limit, places that are completely open, and then that trickles down into how does warranty and service come in. It's just a very complex system that both consumers and manufacturers have to navigate. And I think the bare minimum here is creating better clarity for all those involved, and how they can move forward and purchasing and selling electric vehicles.
Lori, how about you? Final takeaway?
Sure. I just think that consumers are like probably 10 steps behind where this conversation has been. They're a little bit curious, but many of them, had never seen an electric vehicle, had never ridden in one. So they just really need that opportunity to explore. And these laws clearly are limiting even that familiarity. And otherwise they're going to come away with these preconceived notions of, oh, they're all really expensive, or, I mean, they just don't know enough about them yet. And so I think just having that opportunity to really go to an expert is what they're looking for at this point. And they don't understand or recognize right now that in their state, they may be completely limited from that opportunity to understand and explore this new product that people have told me just recently, just this week, in another focus group said, oh yeah, I know it's coming. I know it's the new thing and it's kind of cool. I'd love to learn more about it. So I think that's where a lot of people are starting this conversation.
Yeah, that's really important to keep in mind. Logan, how about you? Final closing thought?
Yeah, I guess my final closing thought is that competition is good, usually always for consumers and usually for a lot of the manufacturers that are involved in this. And I think we have to be very careful when you're looking about trying to enter the new wave of the future while trying to also protect the way of the past. So if Ohio wants to be on the trailblazing end, or Michigan, Mississippi, whatever state you want to pick, as they're trying to make their way into the future, I think it's worthwhile to explore more avenues for competition.
Okay, Suzanne, and then Dan, you got to wrap it up.
Yeah, I just think, echoing everything that was just said, we live in this kind of extraordinary time of investment by government, at the federal level, state level, local level, into this industry. And it just kind of remains almost insane to me that, that governments are also at the same time limiting the consumer's ability to access these products. And this is a very easy, straightforward policy that can fix a lot of these problems that won't cost taxpayers. So if there are any policymakers on the line, hope you're thinking about this.
Yep. Okay, Dan, take us home.
There's a very simple solution here, simple but not easy, which is a federal bill. Congress can do this with one side of the pin, which is a federal dealer licensing system that would preempt state laws to the contrary. You could set that up. I've got a bill that I've drafted that would do this. We're nowhere near the political will or interest in Washington right now for that. But if anyone's listening and wants to know, like, how do we actually, if the Biden administration is serious about wanting to push forward dramatically EV market penetration, there's a way to do that, and the federal government can do it.
Great. Well, you just opened the door for a whole nother webinar. So thanks to all of our speakers today. Really great content. Appreciate everyone joining. Again, we'll make the slides and the presentations available in a follow-up. Look out for the Electrification Coalition new report out today on fleets and the freedom to buy. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks all.